over and over again, the West keeps reminding Africa why it can never be trusted. Take this shocking example. The moment Ghana's currency, the cedi, beat the US dollar to become the top performing currency in the world, guess who stepped in with a warning? The IMF. Yes, instead of celebrating Ghana's progress, the International Monetary Fund accused Ghana of manipulating its currency. Their claim? That the Bank of Ghana has been injecting money into the economy to artificially boost the cedi's value. But here's the million-dollar question. Why should the IMF care about Ghana's success? Is it suddenly a crime for an African currency to rise? And most importantly, should Ghana listen to the IMF? Or is this just another tool of control disguised as financial advice? Stay with us, because what we're about to uncover will make you question everything you thought you knew about the IMF and its role in Africa. Dr. Arikana Chihombori Kwao, former African Union ambassador to the United States, once said something that shook the room. IMF, World Bank, and all these financial institutions make African countries jump through hoops for loans they can never repay. Their survival depends on us failing. Their success is built on our failure. Strong words, but are they true? Look at what's happening in Ghana right now, and you'll have your answer. Ghana just achieved something historic. For the first time in recent memory, an African currency, the Ghanaian cedi, beat the US dollar to become the world's top-performing currency. A moment of pride, right? Something the global financial community should celebrate? Not the IMF. Instead of applauding Ghana's progress, the IMF issued a warning. They accused the Bank of Ghana of manipulating the market, claiming the central bank is injecting money directly into the economy, which is why the cedi is rising. Let that sink in. A stronger currency means lower import costs. It eases inflation. It improves the lives of ordinary Ghanaians. But the IMF says it's not good. Imagine that. When African currencies collapse, the IMF lectures about structural reform. But when an African nation succeeds, suddenly there's a problem. Dr. Arikana was right. And for speaking this truth, she was silenced, sanctioned, and removed. But the truth remains. The global financial system was never designed for Africa to win, and Ghana's situation is proof. The IMF didn't stop at accusations. They went further, warning Ghana to stop manipulating the market and to let the so-called free market decide the strength of the cedi. And here's the twist. Some Ghanaian officials echoed the IMF's words. They claimed the currency's rise wasn't real, that it was just the Bank of Ghana flooding the economy with money. But ask yourself, why does the IMF care so much about Ghana's success? Isn't its mission to help nations stabilize their economies? Then why criticize Ghana for taking steps to strengthen its currency? How does that make sense? The answer is simple and uncomfortable. This is yet another sign that these Western-led institutions were never designed to see Africa succeed. Dr. Arikana said it best. The success of the IMF and World Bank depends on the failure of African economies. And if you doubt that, look at the track record. Decades of IMF programs in Africa, structural adjustments, austerity measures, endless loans. And what do we have to show for it? Crippling debt, collapsed industries, weak currencies. Not one IMF-driven policy has delivered true economic freedom for Africa. Not one. So why the outrage when Ghana finally breaks free, even for a moment, and proves it can succeed on its own terms? Because a strong, independent Africa threatens the very system that keeps these institutions alive. And that's the truth they don't want you to hear. To understand why Ghana's current success matters so much, let's rewind for a moment. Under the previous administration of Nana Akufo-Addo, the Ghanaian economy was on life support. Debt soared to record levels, inflation spiraled out of control, the cedi collapsed, and ordinary citizens bore the brunt of a crisis that many economists called the worst in decades. This was the bleeding economy President John Mahama inherited, a nation drowning in debt and despair. And the first order of business? To stop the bleeding. In a bold move to ease the suffering of millions, Mahama's administration made a game-changing announcement: the scrapping of several controversial taxes imposed during the COVID era by the former government, primarily to meet IMF loan conditions. These weren't just any taxes. They were taxes that hit the average Ghanaian hard, like the 1% levy on mobile money transfers and a VAT on motor vehicle insurance. Both gone. While presenting the 2025 economic budget, Finance Minister Cassiel Ato-Forson explained why this step was necessary. We inherited an economy in deep crisis, weighed down by debt and beset by massive fiscal challenges, arrears, energy sector shortfalls, and risks from the cocoa and financial sectors. In simple terms, Ghana was broke, battered, and bruised, and the IMF's prescription, those so-called reforms, only made the pain worse. But now, for the first time in years, Ghana is fighting back on its own terms. Of course, removing these taxes comes with its own challenges. With an economy already bleeding from debt mismanagement and financing shortfalls, critics are asking, how will the government make up for the lost revenue? The answer from Mahama's administration is simple. Ghanaians cannot keep carrying this weight. Inflation is soaring. The cedi has been battered, and families are struggling to survive. Removing these taxes, they argue, will ease the burden on households, put more money in people's pockets, and give businesses the breathing space they desperately need. As Finance Minister Cassiel Ato-Forson told lawmakers in Accra, the removal of these taxes will ease the burden on households and improve disposable incomes. In addition, it will support business growth. And the cuts didn't stop there. Alongside the mobile money levy and vehicle insurance VAT, the government scrapped a 10% tax on lottery winnings, an emission levy on vehicles and industries, and a 1.5% tax on unprocessed gold from small-scale miners. But here's where the story gets really interesting. These taxes weren't random. They were introduced by Akufo-Addo's administration for one reason: to satisfy the conditions of an IMF bailout. That bailout? A $3 billion loan secured in 2023. Now pause and think about this. What did that loan actually achieve? Did it transform Ghana's economy? Did it reduce poverty? Did it create jobs? No. All it did was push Ghana deeper into debt, while ordinary citizens paid the price through suffocating taxes. This is the dark truth about IMF prescriptions. They promise stability, they deliver dependency, and Ghana's experience is living proof. Thankfully, there's a glimmer of hope. Ghana's finance minister recently stood before Parliament with a bold message: the bleeding has stopped. Under President John Mahama, elected in December, the government has taken aggressive steps to stabilize the economy. One of the key plans? Amending the Revenue Administration Act to improve tax collection, a move expected to generate an additional 0.3% of GDP. And that's not all. Ghana plans to reintroduce road tolls this year under an ambitious infrastructure initiative dubbed the Big Push. But Mahama's administration knows revenue alone won't save Ghana. So, alongside removing nuisance taxes, they've pledged steep spending cuts, a move aimed at reviving the economy and restoring investor confidence. The goal is clear: achieve real GDP growth of at least 4% and bring inflation down to 12%. Economists like Daniel Amatai Anim-Prempeh have praised these moves, calling them a lifeline for ordinary citizens and businesses. He says scrapping those punitive taxes will put money back into people's pockets and give struggling companies a chance to recover. But here's the catch. The success of this plan depends on whether the government can boost revenue without widening the fiscal deficit. And so far, they're making real progress. Progress so remarkable that Ghana's currency, the cedi, outperformed the US dollar and became the world's top-performing currency. This should have been a cause for celebration. Instead, the IMF has chosen criticism over applause. Why? Because Ghana is winning without following the IMF playbook. Because Ghana dared to cut those IMF-backed taxes and still came out on top. And that's the uncomfortable truth. IMF programs are not designed to make African economies thrive. They're designed to keep them dependent. Don't believe it? Let's look at Egypt. For nearly a decade, Egypt's economy has danced to the tune of the IMF. Every major decision, every key reform, directed by Washington-based technocrats. And yet, after all these years, Egypt hasn't prospered. It has collapsed even further. The people know it, because they felt it every single day. Prices climbing, wages stagnant, basic necessities, once affordable, now out of reach for millions of Egyptians. Take March 2024, for example. Egypt signed a massive $8 billion financial support package with the International Monetary Fund. On paper, it sounded like salvation, but the fine print told a different story. To access the money, Egypt had to make painful concessions, slash subsidies on fuel, electricity, and other essentials, float the Egyptian pound freely, allowing its value to sink. What does that mean in real life? It means the government would no longer shield ordinary citizens from skyrocketing costs. Fuel prices soared, electricity bills doubled. Everyday commodities became luxuries. And all this suffering just to unlock billions of dollars in loans, not just from the IMF, but from the World Bank and the European Union as well. Loans that would only sink Egypt deeper into the quicksand of debt. Think about that. Egypt was forced to make life harder for its people in exchange for borrowing more money. Is this economic rescue or economic sabotage? And so Egypt followed the IMF's playbook to the letter. But the results? Catastrophic. Prices for basic commodities exploded. In June 2024, bread, the single most important staple in Egypt, saw its price skyrocket by 300% after subsidies were slashed. By October, the pain deepened. For the third time in a single year, Egypt raised fuel prices. Diesel and gasoline jumped by 11 to 17%. And according to Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli, this is just the beginning. Prices will keep rising, all the way into 2025. For millions of Egyptians, this isn't just inconvenient, it's devastating. Poverty has surged to nearly 30%. The Egyptian pound has lost half its value against the dollar. Inflation? A staggering 33%. And it's not just the people paying the price. Even the government is bleeding. President Sisi admitted that Egypt has lost between $6 and $7 billion in revenue in less than a year, and expects to lose even more in the months ahead. The streets are boiling with anger. Citizens are furious. They say their government has done nothing to protect them from the spiral of poverty. But here's the truth few want to say out loud. This disaster didn't start yesterday. It's the result of years of austerity measures forced on Egypt by the IMF and embraced by its leaders. And now, even President Sisi is hinting at the unthinkable, breaking away from IMF policies and searching for alternatives. Which brings us to the ultimate question, one that every African nation must answer. If IMF programs destroy economies, why do our governments keep signing these deals? Here's the reality. Countries like Egypt, Ghana, Cameroon, and Nigeria all have one thing in common. They need money to keep their economies running. And where do they turn? To global financial giants like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These institutions weren't created yesterday. After World War II, the World Bank's original mission was clear: rebuild a shattered Europe and support long-term development. Over time, that mission expanded to what they now call reducing extreme poverty by offering loans to struggling nations. The IMF? Its purpose was to safeguard the stability of the global monetary system, making sure currencies remained stable and trade could flow freely across borders. Sounds noble, doesn't it? But here's the part they never put in the brochures. These institutions were created by the West, for the West. Every policy they design, every condition they impose, every reform they demand is rooted in Western ideals, crafted to serve Western interests. And that is why, decade after decade, the same question echoes across Africa. Are these loans really about helping us or controlling us? And this is where the real trap begins. Because when the IMF and World Bank offer loans, they don't just hand over the money. No, every dollar comes with strings attached, and those strings are tied to Western ideology. Take this for example. If a country wants a loan, it must embrace so-called universal values, like democracy, freedom of expression, and yes, even LGBTQ rights. Don't believe it? Look at what happened in Uganda last year. After the government passed an anti-gay law, the World Bank blocked Uganda's access to loans, cutting off billions in funding. But here's the thing. Cultural and political conditions aren't the only strings. There's another condition, one that's far more dangerous to Africa's economic survival, one that experts believe has crippled economies from Cairo to Accra. It's called neoliberal conditionality. In simple terms, the IMF demands that countries implement a strict set of economic policies before they can access funds. Policies that sound good on paper, but in reality, wreck entire nations. What do these policies include? Slashing government spending, even on social services and infrastructure, privatizing state-owned companies, selling them off, forcing austerity, cutting subsidies and welfare no matter the cost to the poor, market liberalization, throwing local markets open to global competition, and perhaps the deadliest of all, devaluing national currencies and letting them float freely, triggering inflation and making imports unaffordable. Sound familiar? It should. These are the same policies that crushed Egypt. And if history is any guide, they've left behind a trail of broken economies all across Africa. So the question is, are these loans really a lifeline or a noose tightening around Africa's neck? And what has been the result of these so-called reforms? Disaster. You see, the IMF and World Bank didn't just wake up one day and push neoliberal policies on Africa. No, they began advocating them right after independence, when African nations were still vulnerable, still struggling to build strong economies. They turned to these global institutions for help. The answer they got? Loans with conditions. Those conditions became the infamous structural adjustment programs, hailed at the time as the magic bullet for Africa's economic woes. Governments believed the promises, they implemented the policies, and then the nightmare began. If you dig into history, you'll find a grim truth. These policies became the foundation of Africa's economic crisis today, cutting subsidies, privatizing state-owned enterprises, opening markets to foreign corporations. What did it lead to? Decreased incomes, skyrocketing poverty, decades of stagnation and recession. And worst of all, it opened Africa's doors wide for Western multinational corporations to swoop in and bleed the continent dry under the banner of foreign investment. Even when African countries later abandoned these policies, the damage had already been done. And yet, here we are, decades later, and the IMF and World Bank are still preaching the same gospel, still forcing nations to swallow the same bitter pill, expecting a miracle. But isn't that the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? Or maybe it's not insanity at all. Maybe the system was designed this way. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. These institutions are Western creations. They were never meant to liberate Africa. They were built to keep Africa in check. And if you think that sounds extreme, just look at the evidence. Every time Africa tries to stand, these institutions pull the rug right from under its feet. The World Bank and IMF were created with one noble mission: to eradicate poverty in developing countries. But here's the paradox. These institutions have created more poverty-stricken nations than any others in modern history. It's no wonder some experts call them the biggest scam of the century. Look at Ghana. Look at Egypt. Their stories are not unique. They are the blueprint. Take Egypt, for example. Since 2017, the IMF has had its hands deep inside the Egyptian economy. And in just a few years, Egypt became the second largest client of the IMF in the entire world. How? Through loans, massive loans. Egypt has borrowed more than $20 billion in 3 separate IMF programs, and now another $8 billion over the next 3 years. That's nearly $30 billion in IMF-driven debt. And here's the kicker. The IMF didn't just lend Egypt the money, it became the godfather of Egypt's borrowing policy, encouraging private lenders and global investors to pump even more money into Egypt's debt market. For the past 7 years, the IMF has been the architect of Egypt's economic policy. But ask yourself this, has Egypt gotten any better? No, it's gotten worse, much worse. Poverty is soaring, inflation is out of control, the currency has lost half its value. And yet, listen to the IMF's narrative. They claim their first big program, the Extended Credit Facility from 2017 to 2019, was a success. According to them, it strengthened Egypt's resilience. So why is the economy collapsing now? Their excuse? External shocks? COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, rising global interest rates, inflation, even the conflict in Gaza. But here's the truth they'll never admit. Egypt's collapse was engineered long before these crises, by the same policies the IMF forced into place. And Egypt is just one example in a long list of countries trapped in this endless cycle of debt and dependency. But let's challenge the IMF story for a moment. If Egypt's crisis was caused by external shocks, why did those shocks hit Egypt harder than almost any other country with a similar income level? Why did inflation explode beyond control? Why did the currency collapse? Why did food insecurity skyrocket? Why did education and health reforms fail to create equality and opportunity? The answer is in the numbers, and numbers don't lie. After Egypt fully implemented the IMF's prescribed measures in 2017, poverty and hunger rates soared to historic highs. By 2018, 32.5% of Egyptians lived in poverty. Hunger hit 6.2%. Between 2020 and 2022, 28.5% of Egypt's population faced severe or moderate food insecurity. Undernourishment reached its worst level in decades. Meanwhile, Egypt's external debt more than doubled, from $55.8 billion in 2016 to $164.5 billion by 2023. The debt trap tightened. Repayments due within a single year? A staggering $51 billion, nearly 1.5 times Egypt's entire foreign reserves. And the currency? By early 2023, the Egyptian pound ranked among the 6 worst performing currencies in the world. This isn't the result of bad luck. It's the direct outcome of the IMF's playbook: austerity, privatization, currency devaluation, market liberalization, all in the name of reform, and all leading to collapse. So what does this tell us? It's simple. These institutions are not designed to help Africa. They are tools of control. And the sooner African nations realize this, the sooner they can break free from the cycle of dependency and poverty. The only path forward is independence, seeking alternatives, building homegrown solutions, and working with partners who respect Africa's sovereignty. Because if the IMF and World Bank truly wanted Africa to succeed, we wouldn't be here today. Now, what do you think? Should African countries finally walk away from these Western-led financial institutions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more deep dives into Africa's fight for economic freedom.